I'm sure you've all seen at least one episode of The Twilight Zone. And sometimes I think I live in the Twilight Zone. It's another topic. In one episode entitled A Nice Place to Visit, Rod Sterling narrates the following story. After robbing a pawn shop, Henry, also known as Rocky Valentine, is shot by a police officer as he flees. And he wakes up to find himself seemingly unharmed. And a genial old man greets him. He explains that he has been instructed to guide Rocky and give him whatever he desires. And the two travel to a luxurious apartment. Everything is free. And Rocky concludes that he's dead and believes he is in heaven, and the gentleman is his guardian angel. Rocky then visits a casino, winning every bet he makes. His beautiful girls surround him. But no one except Rocky and his angel is real. By and by, Rocky becomes thoroughly bored with having his every earthly desire instantly satisfied. No friends, no generosity, no love. Just absolute instant gratification. And he calls the gentleman and he tells him he is tired of heaven and wants to go to the other place to join his friends. And the gentleman's response is the grand finale. Heaven? Whatever gave you the idea you were in heaven, Mr. Valentine? This is the other place. And so on the first Sunday of Lent, we need to give hell a chance, or at least rethink it. Why not think of heaven and hell as places we choose according to the respective merits of each? Think of all the choices we have in this life. Then think of living with those choices for eternity. Hell is more than a place. Hell is what we choose. Think of all the pleasures of the world and then think of possessing them for eternity, like chocolate. Maybe hell is made up of the worldly pleasures we freely choose, our personal absolutes, what we want and when we want it. Is that so wrong? Come to think about it, Satan is good at customer relations. He's there to please. And that's the first choice Jesus is given in this gospel scene. Choose your own comfort, use your power for your purposes. It was not intended. And after all, who's going to know? And we get caught up in that same subtle temptation all the time. Let me use something, maybe a part of myself, for purposes it was not intended. And if I can get away with it, even better, we think. But someone does know, and that would be yourself. Succumbing to this temptation is the surest way to rot away your integrity and turn your self-love into self-loathing. Jesus undergoes these temptations while spending 40 days in the desert. And the 40 is, of course, meant to remind us of Israel's 40 years in the desert. It took them 40 years because at each temptation they failed. After 40 years, they finally became who they were supposed to be, the Israel of God, living in covenant relationship with God. And once they were in possession of their true identity, they then and only then found themselves in the promised land. Likewise, Jesus, by resisting each temptation, is able to become who he was, the Messiah of Israel, and ready to lead his people to the promised land of the kingdom. Jesus refutes the first temptation with the word of God. In fact, he uses the word to refute each temptation, and he uses passage taken from the Exodus story from the book of Deuteronomy. And at first, Satan is very subtle, coy even. Just turn these stones into bread. I mean, why not? After all, you can. In the second temptation, Satan becomes more bold. You say the Father will protect you. Well, then prove it. Jump from the parapet. I mean, why not? Don't you trust your Father? Here's the thing. We can say we trust God, but we really never know until that situation warrants. We're good at taking things into our own hands. We like to say, thanks God for the help on that one, but I'll handle the rest. Again, Jesus confounds the temptation with the Word of God. Jesus refuses to use his divine power, but rather submits to the test as any man would have to do. He's coming to understand that the proper use of his power would be found only in his suffering and passion. Any other use of it would be only for his own purposes. Jesus is always thinking about the other and not himself. He's always trusting the Father, so he can adamantly say, "You shall not test the Lord your God." And then finally, Satan drops off pretense. He says, "Worship me. I will give you everything you want." After all, Jesus wanted to spread the message of his kingdom far and wide. What a great offer, instant success. No hard work, no cross, no death. And this is, after all, what Satan wants most, our undivided loyalty and our freedom. How easily we hand it over. Just take it. This freedom is too much of a burden. And that's why we need Lent, to help us resist and to resist properly. Satan is really asking Jesus to reject his limitations. After all, that was the first temptation the serpent posed to Adam and Eve. Did God really say, "If you eat of this tree, you will die"? He appeals right to their egos, and they give in and reject their dependence on God's creative love and strive to be the creator and not the creature. And that altered their relationship with God and with each other. And they ultimately would live in untruth and unreality, refusing the limitations that good and evil placed upon them. In fact, it altered all our relationships ever since. We say like them, "I will free myself from the limitations imposed by morality." The covenant with God, it's not a gift, but it's a straitjacket that robs me of my freedom. This is really the ultimate trick of the serpent, because we do not ultimately free ourselves, but rather we enslave ourselves and place ourselves in opposition to the truth. So Jesus, as Paul says, is the new Adam whom humanity begins anew. The Son, who is by nature relationship and relatedness, reestablishes relationships wounded by the sin of Adam and Eve. His arms spread out on the cross are an open invitation to relationship. The cross, the place of disobedience, is the tree of life. From this tree comes not a word of temptation, but that of redeeming love. The word of obedience becomes the context of freedom. The late Pope Benedict XVI said, "The Eucharist is the presence of the cross among us, the ever-present tree of life, inviting us to take the fruit of true life. When we receive the Eucharist, it means we receive the crucified Lord and the parameters of his life, his obedience as the standard of creatureliness. When we receive the Eucharist, we are choosing the obedience of Christ over the disobedience of Adam and Eve. When we partake of the Eucharist, we are strengthened to resist the temptation to not be who we are called to be." When Moses asked God, "Who are you?" God responded, "I am who am." In other words, God is the very ground of being from which everything gets its being. Satan says, "I am who am not." In other words, there is no life, no truth to be found in him. Whereas God seeks to impart life, Satan seeks to destroy life. And so Lent is the time to choose heaven or hell, to choose life or death. Lent helps us free ourselves from our refusals and our doubt concerning God's covenant, from our rejection of the limitations and from the lie of our autonomy. May our Lenten practices direct us to the tree of life, which is always our standard and our hope.